The room was already electric, but when Tyler Perry stepped toward the BET Awards microphone, the atmosphere tilted, like the floor had quietly shifted a few degrees and nobody knew which way it was down anymore. Cameras were still settling their focus, audience members half watching the teleprompter and half refreshing their socials, and that's when he let the silence stretch just long enough for every heartbeat to register. Then, smiling as gently as a pastor delivering a benediction, he spoke 9 words that cracked the night wide open. Some folks borrow blessings like they're owed, then never pay. The line floated out over sequins and studio lights, and before the audience could exhale every curious eye flicked instinctively toward Meghan Markle's row. She kept her composure, barely, and the air between her smile and the rest of the ballroom chilled 10 degrees. No names, no follow-up, just that one velvet-wrapped warning shot. Phones lit up instantly, loved ones at home rewound their live streams, and somewhere in the mezzanine a publicist whispered, "Well, that's the headline." Rewind to February 2020, the moment the Sussexes touched down in Los Angeles, with more tabloid heat than luggage. They had titles without the budget, global fame without the protective walls, and a security bill that made even Hollywood veterans blanch. Most old friends suddenly possessed conflicting travel plans. Tyler Perry, who had met Meghan only twice, sent a text that simply read, "You'll need somewhere safe. My place is yours." That place happened to be an $18 million estate tucked behind redwood gates, invisible from the street, guarded by a detail so discreet it could have moonlighted for heads of state. He covered everything: payroll, utilities, even incidental landscaping fees that might expose the address if an invoice went public. For weeks, gratitude sparkled. Handwritten notes arrived on textured stationery. Harry telephoned with earnest English thank yous. Late-night group FaceTimes ended with prayer. Generosity, however, is like a fine-tuned string. It plays sweetly until tension goes too far. The first strain was almost imperceptible. A private chef summoned on half an hour's notice, so a new plant-based recipe could be photographed before daylight faded. Then a wardrobe steamer couriered after midnight because linen refused to lie flat before an early Zoom. A Himalayan salt lamp imported overnight because a yoga instructor swore by its restorative ions. Each request sounded harmless in isolation, but they multiplied. Staff on Perry's payroll began keeping a separate spreadsheet just to track special asks. Tyler was famous for never saying no, yet the frequency felt less like emergencies and more like a standing order. September 2020 brought Fashion Week in New York, and the request that would snap the final thread. Meghan's team called at sunrise. She needed Perry's Gulfstream for a pop-up speech and photo op that very afternoon. Fuel and crew overtime weren't mentioned. Liability wasn't discussed. The underlying assumption, to Perry's ears, was that the luxury jet was simply another amenity to be unwrapped at will. He politely declined, schedule conflicts, insurance constraints, and according to an aide on speaker, the temperature on the line dropped to polar. Meghan allegedly accused him of blocking her moment. It wasn't the words, but the entitlement behind them that lodged in Perry's chest like a splinter. He still tried to hold the friendship together. Silence, he figured, was a better plaster than public confrontation. But Los Angeles thrives on oxygenated gossip. Assistants traded warnings. Meghan collects mentors the way influencers collect promo codes. Promise them visibility, repay at leisure, move on when the next bigger stage appears. A Netflix executive who had lionized the Sussex docuseries now described the pitch as all velvet rope, no story spine, and pulled the budget. Spotify producers, exhausted by rewrite loops, flagged the partnership as in creative limbo bordering on abandonment. Inside Archwell's airy headquarters overlooking the Pacific, spreadsheets started bleeding red. Grants trumpeted in glossy social posts suddenly hit pause for strategic review. An internal memo spelled it out. If just one more marquee donor left, operating cash would dip below safe reserves by year's end. Staff suggested trimming overhead. Communications proposed doubling down on brand-positive headlines. Meghan's team chose the latter. Op-eds materialized hinting that Tyler was struggling with her meteoric rise, that he felt eclipsed. Most editors passed. The spin smelled too obvious. Then came the straw that broke the camel as thoroughly as Fashion Week had bent it. 3 separate pitch decks circulated to studios listing Tyler as a silent equity partner in future Sussex productions. Mind you, none of these budgets had crossed his desk. One claimed Perry's soundstages were tentatively booked for a docudrama about unconventional royal love stories. He heard about the booking from a Warner Brothers contact over lunch. The shock turned slowly into disappointment and finally into resolve. Cue the BET Awards, June 2025. Under kaleidoscope lights and a full gospel choir, Perry delivered a single sentence that said everything contracts never would. Reactions popped like flashbulbs. Overnight, a mid-level producer withdrew from a Sussex Netflix spinoff. A venture capitalist texted, "Exposure risk too high, pausing talks." TikTok stitched the soundbite onto slow-motion red carpet footage. Twitter birthed #borrowed blessings before midnight. Pollsters recorded a 30-point plunge in Meghan's U.S. favorability within 3 days. In the UK, her numbers tunneled basement deep. Sunrise in Montecito felt like tree. Crisis consultants camped in the living room, pinning Gantt charts to a cork wall. Their most radical pitch: disappear from cameras for half a year, volunteer quietly, rebuild trust through invisibility. Meghan recoiled. Her influence thrived in daylight. A different advisor suggested a televised apology. Strategists warned that audiences detect manufactured remorse faster than a bad green screen. Every solution threatened to amplify the original charge. That generosity had been treated like a debit card with no ceiling. Meanwhile, finance bloggers dissected Archwell's filings. Administrative costs were creeping upward while program expenses slid. One headline asked, "Charity or couture mood board?" Social commentators placed a photo of Meghan's new cashmere coat beside a chart of shrinking grants. The meme practically wrote itself. Friendly journalists who'd normally defend her went silent. Each new angle felt pre-spun. Perry, notably, kept his peace. Instead of interviews, he funneled energy into launching a scholarship fund for Black filmmakers. 8 figures, minimal fanfare. The gesture served like a lighthouse. Generosity still existed, just not for borrowers who treated kindness like an interest-free loan. Late-night hosts looped his phrase through monologue punchlines. Soho House power brokers instructed junior agents to add a reputational risk column to new client assessments. The phrase "don't pair yourself" surfaced in entertainment law circles as shorthand for underwriting someone else's PR gamble. All the while Harry paced the patio before dawn, email draft glowing on his phone. "We will forever be grateful for your shelter. I regret that gratitude got drowned out by noise." He pressed send, felt a strange lightness, and realized forgiveness has no read receipt. Meghan, pen hovering above linen stationery, tried draft after draft, each one sounding like crisis copy. She finally closed the notebook and stepped outside, inhaling the salted air, unsure when simple thanks had become a brand asset. Streaming giants responded with policies instead of platitudes. Future Sussex payments would unlock only after episodes hit deliverables. Merch contracts gained opt-out clauses pegged to monthly sentiment indexes. Staff turnover spiked. LinkedIn sprouted ex-Archwell resumes. Paparazzi caught moving trucks near the estate. PR reps insisted it was seasonal redecorating. The optics told a leaner story. Tyler's quiet stance became the industry's new North Star. A hedge fund titan quoted him at Yale's commencement. "Real wealth is generosity that knows its limit." Ministers wove the line into sermons on stewardship. Even self-help influencers used it as mantra backing track for morning routine reels. One rainy Monday in October, Meghan's consultants tried a fresh tack, stone soup strategy, they called it. Assemble a coalition of earlier supporters, co-produce mini-doc projects, share credit, rebuild goodwill. The blueprint looked promising until someone asked who would invite Perry to the table. Silence fell. Pens stopped scratching notes. You can outsource crisis messaging, but you can't subcontract humility. Across town at the Polo Lounge, the entertainment crowd had adopted a new litmus test. Would Tyler Perry lend you a charger? Became shorthand for measuring a celebrity's reputational equity. Meanwhile, on TikTok, Hashtag borrowed blessings had evolved into hashtag reputation collateral, a sprawling hub where creators recounted similar cautionary tales. Stars who scorched allies and discovered bridges aren't covered by insurance. A media ethics professor recorded a viral explainer likening Perry's 9-word sermon to Martin Luther's theses: concise, public, and impossible to retract once nailed to the church door of social media. Inside Archewell's headquarters, the monthly dashboard arrived like another body blow. Donations dropped 8% more, merch sales plateaued, and corporate partners requested quarterly touchpoints instead of standing calls. A board member dared to suggest anonymous giving. No cameras, no hashtags, just impact. Meghan bristled, yet the logic was ironclad. Credibility restored in whispers would outlast any billboard apology. So she authorized a pilot program funding community gardens through a shell foundation that buried her involvement 5 layers deep. It felt counterintuitive, philanthropy without selfie sticks, but also strangely liberating. Weeks later, local news ran a 30-second package on a neighborhood harvest day, praising an unnamed benefactor. No one connected the dots, yet Meghan clipped the segment and slid it into her gratitude journal, a quiet down payment on goodwill. Harry mirrored the shift. He began calling veteran mental health charities linked to his military past, offering resources off-camera. Executives accepted, thanked him, and noted that sometimes influence works better unadvertised. For a couple who had spent years equating visibility with value, the discoveries felt like learning a foreign language, fluency in anonymity. By December, the social media storm that once looked apocalyptic had drifted behind fresher controversies, but its residue lingered. New Sussex contracts came with shorter timelines and stricter deliverables. Talk show invitations slowed to a trickle. Yet in that vacuum, something small but sturdy was growing. The garden grants spread fresh produce to food desert schools. Harry's silent funding underwrote a 24/7 veteran helpline that saw call volume jump 40%. Ironically, the fewer headlines they chased, the more tangible their results became. An embossed envelope arrived just after New Year's. Tyler was hosting a private screening of his historical drama for a handful of friends and donors. Seats were limited. Would the Sussexes like to attend? Meghan hesitated. It could be an olive branch or a polite formality, but Harry pointed out that sometimes the only way forward is through the door someone opens, even if it's a tight fit. They booked commercial flights, carried their own garment bags, and declined the chauffeured SUV. The evening unfolded without tension. Tyler greeted them with the same warm hug he'd given 5 years earlier. Not a single flashbulb popped. They munched popcorn, laughed at the right beats, and wiped eyes during the third act gut punch. When the credits faded, Perry thanked the cast and crew, then added, almost as an afterthought, "And to anyone who learns, apologizes, and keeps going, thank you for reminding the rest of us why we keep giving." He didn't direct the words at anyone, yet Meghan felt them settle like a fresh blanket on a cold night, soft but undeniably present. They slipped out a side exit, hopped a rideshare back to a modest hotel, and spent the ride debating LA taco trucks versus London curry houses. For once, the conversation wasn't content strategy or crisis math. It was ordinary, unmonetized life. Later, as Meghan hung her dress on the back of a chair, she realized that the evening had cost them 0 followers, yet earned them something rarer: relief. The next morning, a journalist camped outside Perry's studio shouted a question about forgiveness. He paused, smiled the way he does when a moral is coming, and answered, "Forgiveness isn't a headline, it's living without the weight." The quote in trend, algorithmic appetite had moved on, but within industry corridors it traveled by word of mouth, a reminder that the best stories sometimes stay quiet. Back home, the Sussex household moved at a gentler tempo. Meghan still planned projects, but slotted thank you time into her calendar. Harry recommitted to therapy sessions he'd postponed. They paid outstanding invoices, often adding small bonuses. Through a mutual friend, they learned that staff, once laid off, were rehired by Perry Studios. Some even volunteered for his scholarship fund. The cycle of giving had restarted, only now with stronger guardrails. Spring brought another audit, And for the first time in 2 years, every Archewell metric trended upward. Donations rose, programs spend outpaced overhead, and an independent evaluator labeled the organization best practice compliant. The report landed quietly, no press release needed, and when Meghan finished reading, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since the BET Awards. One evening, months later, she stepped onto the same Montecito terrace where crisis teams once plotted damage control. The ocean looked identical, but the silence felt different, weightless instead of tense. She opened her notebook and listed blessings once more. Garden programs thriving, veteran helpline funded, Tyler's gentle invitation, Harry's steady forgiveness, and the rediscovered truth that gratitude whispered beats gratitude shouted. The saga that started with a single borrowed blessing and a single line of rebuke didn't end with viral contrition, brand reboots, or dramatic reconciliations. It resolved in quieter frequencies, a billionaire confirming that boundaries protect generosity, a duchess discovering anonymity can fertilize real impact, an industry updating its unwritten etiquette, an audience reminded that favors aren't free. Hollywood, like the rest of life, eventually balances the ledger. Some debts are paid in cash, some in humility, some in stories told softly long after marquees dim. And sometimes the greatest plot twist is realizing that the credit you crave is best earned when nobody is looking, except the one person whose blessing you finally learn to repay.